Caitlin Clark just broke 5 world records in a single game, and the coaching staff's response was to take the ball out of her hands. Nobody on the outside could explain it. Nobody on the inside would explain it. And then a brand new coach walked in, made one decision in about 30 seconds flat, and accidentally exposed everything that had been going on behind the scenes. Stay with me until the end of this video, because you're going to find out why the "everyone deserves a turn" philosophy might be the single most dangerous idea in women's basketball right now. You're going to see the one number from that New Zealand blowout that proves the previous approach was never really about tactics. And you're going to understand exactly why what happened in Puerto Rico is not just a coaching story, it's a direct preview of what the Indiana Fever's 2026 season is about to look like. And trust me, that last part is bigger than any tournament. Real quick before we get into it, everything you're about to hear is based on publicly available information, verified game data, and our own film and statistical breakdown. This channel has no affiliation with Caitlin Clark, the Indiana Fever, USA Basketball, or the WNBA. We're not here to take sides. We're here to break down what the numbers actually say and let you decide what it means. All opinions are for informational and entertainment purposes only, and we respect every single player in this conversation. All right, let's go back to where this whole thing started. Because the beginning is the part that makes everything else impossible to explain away. Team USA opened their FIBA qualifying run against Senegal, and Caitlin Clark, in her very first appearance with the senior national team, did something that had never been done before in the entire history of international women's basketball. She broke 5 FIBA world records in one game. 5 separate records, not one lucky shooting night, not one fluky stat line. 5 different categories of dominance shattered before most fans had even finished their first half of coffee. Now, I need you to understand what that actually means on a basketball level, because this is where it gets tactical and I don't want you to gloss over it. When we're talking about records in assists and overall efficiency, we are not just talking about pretty numbers in a box score. We are talking about basketball intelligence operating at a frequency the game almost never sees. A point guard performing at that level isn't just running plays, she is reading the entire floor in real time. She sees the gap in the defense before the defender has even started closing. She delivers the pass before the cutter has finished their cut. She's 3 steps ahead of everyone else on the court at all times. Think about it this way. If your basketball team is a computer, an elite playmaking guard is the processor. She doesn't just make things faster, she determines how fast the entire system can run. Every other piece of that machine depends on what she processes and how quickly she processes it. So when you take that processor offline, when you move her off the ball, when you sit her down because you want to give someone else a turn at the wheel, you don't just lose her individual output. You slow down the entire machine. Every single cog in that system runs slower without her in the middle of it. And here's what the numbers confirmed in real time during that tournament. In every stretch where Clark was running the offense, the ball moved like it had somewhere to be. Pace was up, assists were up. Team USA looked like the powerhouse everyone expected them to be. But in the stretches where she was moved off the ball or sitting on the bench, the offense became exactly what you'd expect without an elite engine. Half-court possessions going absolutely nowhere. Some of the most talented women on the planet standing around, looking like they were waiting for someone to tell them what to do next. So, after 5 world records, after all of that evidence playing out live on television, a reporter walked up to head coach Kara Lawson and asked her point blank, no ambiguity about Caitlin Clark's role going forward. And Lawson's answer, she talked about team unity. She talked about how every player on the roster is a starter on their WNBA team. She talked about sharing the ball and being happy for each other. Beautiful sentiments, genuinely lovely team-building language. But the reporter didn't ask about team unity. The reporter asked about Caitlin Clark. And Lawson answered as if that name had never been spoken out loud. When you watch that press conference back, and I have watched it more than once, there's this specific moment where you realize she isn't just choosing her words carefully. She is actively choosing not to acknowledge what had just happened on that court at all. And that is where the questions start getting louder. But here's the thing I need you to hold in your mind right now. Because Lawson wasn't alone in that coaching room. Sitting right there beside her was someone who coaches Caitlin Clark every single day at the professional level. And that person's presence in Puerto Rico tells you something crucial about what we're actually dealing with here. We'll be there in just a moment. Stephanie White. If you follow the Indiana Fever at all, you know that name. White is the head coach of the franchise, which means she is Caitlin Clark's coach, not just in this tournament, but in every film session, every practice, every tactical decision across an entire WNBA regular season. And White has a documented, consistent, observable approach to how she deploys Caitlin Clark. Slower pace, more half-court sets, Clark operating off the ball more frequently, less orchestrating from the top of the key, more functioning as a catch-and-shoot option out on the wing. Now, I want to be genuinely fair here because intellectual honesty matters when we're talking about real people's careers. Slow it down, control the tempo basketball is a completely legitimate philosophy. There are coaches who have built championship programs around it. In the right situation with the right personnel, it absolutely works. But here is the tactical problem. Caitlin Clark's entire game is constructed around space and pace. Her logo 3, that pull-up from way beyond the arc that makes crowds lose their minds, that only works when she has the time and distance to get into her mechanics before a defender can close the gap. Her no-look passes the ones that make you rewind the clip just to figure out how she saw that those reads happen in transition when the defense hasn't had time to set up and there are bodies moving in every direction. Her off-ball movement to create opportunities for teammates is most dangerous when the floor is already stretched and the game is already moving fast. You take all of that and you put it in a half-court grind, and you are not just limiting her output. You are asking a Formula One car to navigate rush hour traffic and then scratching your head wondering why it hasn't hit its top speed. So now look at the picture that's forming. Lawson coaching Team USA consistently more comfortable when Clark is doing less. White coaching the Fever consistently more comfortable when Clark is doing less. Two different coaches. Two completely different contexts. One identical pattern. At what point does that stop being a tactical coincidence and start being a shared philosophy? Now, and I want to address this directly because there's a version of this story floating around online that isn't completely accurate. Some people framed Lawson's departure mid-tournament as mysterious, unexplained, a sign of some kind of internal explosion behind closed doors. Here's what actually happened. Lawson is also the head coach of Duke women's basketball. The NCAA tournament was approaching. She was always scheduled to return to her college program after the early games of this qualifying run. That was communicated. The broadcast team acknowledged it during the first game. So no, it was not a dramatic disappearance. It was not a secret firing in the middle of the night. But here is what that perfectly reasonable schedule explanation does not answer. It does not explain the lineup decisions while she was still there. It does not explain why the player who just made history was then managed away from the ball in the very next game. It does not explain why a direct question about Clark at a press conference turned into a 4-minute speech about team philosophy. The logistics of Lawson's calendar are explainable. The coaching decisions on that floor are not. And that distinction matters more than anything else in this story. Because what happened the moment Nate Tibbetts took over didn't just change the lineup. It changed the entire frame of this conversation in a way that nobody was prepared for. Nate Tibbetts, head coach of the Phoenix Mercury. His reputation around the league analytical direct, completely no nonsense. The kind of guy who looks at data and makes decisions based on what he sees, rather than what fits a pre-existing narrative. His very first move as interim head coach of Team USA before a single tip-off against New Zealand was to write Caitlin Clark's name into the starting lineup. Not after a long committee meeting, not after polling the veterans, not after delivering a speech about earning your minutes. He looked at the roster, identified the best player available, and started her. Simple as that. The starting five, he put on the floor Kelsey Plum, Caitlin, Clark, Paige, Bueckers, Rhyne Howard, and Angel Reese. And I want to break down why this lineup isn't just good, it is architecturally smart in a way that reflects a real understanding of how Clark operates at her best. Clark in the middle means the entire offense flows through her vision. Every read she makes has options attached to it because of who's around her. Plum and Bueckers on either side are both elite off-ball movers. They don't need possessions run for them to be threats. They are constantly creating decisions for the defense just by moving. Reese down low is a relentless physical force. Near the basket, she draws contact, she seals defenders, she takes the physicality away from the perimeter, so Clark has room to operate. Howard stretches the floor to the corners and forces the defense to respect the three-point line all the way to the baseline. This is not 5 individuals sharing playing time. This is a system intentionally constructed so that when Clark makes a read, there is always someone in exactly the right place to make that read pay off. The result, Team USA 101, New Zealand 46, a 55-point margin of victory. Clark led the team in assists, led the team in efficiency, ran the offense exactly the way she had been running it when she shattered those 5 records against Senegal. The ball moved with purpose. Transition opportunities opened up constantly. Fast breaks that hadn't existed days earlier were suddenly everywhere. It looked like an entirely different team from the one that had been grinding through stagnant half-court sets with no answers. But the most significant moment of that entire tournament didn't happen on the floor. It happened at the podium after the game. Tibbetts stood in front of reporters and did something that almost never happens in professional sports coaching. He acknowledged publicly, directly, without the usual protective language, that the previous approach had not been right. He didn't say they were still finding the right combinations. He didn't say every tournament is a growth experience. He said the rotations had been shuffled around too much. He said the group hadn't been given sufficient time to build real chemistry together. He specifically praised the starting lineup, the one with Clark at the center, and made it absolutely clear that this was the direction the team needed to go. A coach. On live television. Essentially telling the entire basketball world that the staff before him had gotten the Caitlin Clark situation wrong. That does not happen. Coaches protect each other in this league. They use diplomatic language that means everything and nothing simultaneously. They deflect, they pivot, they stay vague. Tibbetts just stood at a microphone and told the truth out loud. Now I have to be careful not to overclaim here because intellectual honesty cuts both ways. New Zealand is not a top 5 FIBA program. A 55-point win is dominant, but it doesn't carry the same weight as beating a top European squad. The level of competition matters when you're drawing conclusions. But here's what the competition level does not change. The difference in ball movement was visible to the naked eye. The difference in pace was measurable in the box score. The difference in how Clark functioned when the system was built around her vision versus when it wasn't, that was documented across multiple games with multiple opponents. The data doesn't care who was on the other side of the court. It just shows what happens when you let the engine run at full capacity versus when you keep the throttle pressed down. And here's the thing that makes all of this land differently when you think about the WNBA. Tibbetts fixed something in an international qualifying tournament. But when the buzzer sounded and everyone went home, Caitlin Clark went back to Indiana. Back to the franchise. Back to the coach whose philosophy is the one Tibbetts, just publicly on camera in front of every reporter in that building, walked back. So what does that actually mean for the Fever going into 2026? Let me paint you the real picture of what's sitting in Indiana right now. Because the roster is not the problem, and I want you to feel the weight of what that means. Aliyah Boston anchoring the front court. one of the most fundamentally sound post players in the entire league. She doesn't need elaborate plays drawn up for her. She needs space and a passer who can find her before the double team arrives. Clark is that passer. Boston benefits directly and immediately every single time Clark is running the offense at full speed. Sophie Cunningham on the wing, and this name genuinely does not get enough attention in this conversation. Cunningham is almost perfectly designed to thrive in a Clark-centered pace and space offense. She doesn't need the ball in her hands to change the game. She spaces the floor she shoots without hesitation the moment she catches, and she plays with a competitive intensity that raises the level of everyone around her. In transition, when Clark is pushing pace and finding shooters before the defense can rotate, Cunningham is a matchup nightmare. Put those two together in the right system, and you are giving opposing coaches a problem they genuinely cannot solve with conventional defense. Kelsey Mitchell, a player capable of creating her own shot off the dribble independently, which means the defense can't simply collapse everything onto Clark. If you send a double team at Clark, Mitchell makes you pay. If you hedge too hard on the ball screen, Boston seals inside and scores. The talent in that building creates problems from every angle. The ceiling of this Fever roster in the right system is genuinely alarming. And the thing that makes it so frustrating is that we've already seen a version of that ceiling. We watched it in real time in Puerto Rico. We watched Clark break 5 world records when she was given the freedom and the space to operate. We watched a 55-point demolition when a coach built his system around her vision instead of around managing her role. That footage exists. Those box scores are permanent. The evidence is not theoretical anymore. So the only question left is not whether Clark can perform at that level with the Fever. She already proved she can do it on the biggest international stage there is. The question is whether the people making decisions in Indiana look at what just happened and choose to do something different. The best coaches in history, the ones whose names are still spoken with reverence decades later, were never the ones with the most rigid philosophy. They were the ones who could look at what they had in their hands and adapt. Pat Riley saw Magic Johnson and built Showtime around his ability to run. He didn't slow the game down because the veterans needed their share of moments. Phil Jackson saw Michael Jordan and constructed the triangle offense specifically to amplify Jordan's vision and decision-making, not to contain it, not to distribute his minutes more equally, but to make him more dangerous. The blueprint for this has been written over and over again across the history of the sport. The talent is already in the building in Indiana. The ceiling is already visible on film. The only variable left in this equation is the decision being made in the coaching room. Here's the part that gets me every single time I sit down and think about this whole story. Through all of it, the 5 world records, the lineup decisions, the press conferences where her name got answered with speeches about somebody else, the 55-point win, Tibbetts standing at that podium admitting the previous approach was wrong. Through all of it, Caitlin Clark said nothing. Not one passive-aggressive interview, not one vague post on social media designed to shift sympathy in her direction, not one comment to a beat reporter that could be interpreted 2 different ways. She played her minutes, put up her numbers, and let the box score do the talking. And here's why that restraint is actually the most powerful thing she did in this entire situation. When the person at the center of a controversy refuses to perform the controversy when they won't give the story the fuel it needs to become about personalities, all of the attention moves to the people making the decisions around them. The coaching choices couldn't hide behind a personality conflict. There was no personality conflict to point to. There was just data. And data has no agenda. Data doesn't get tired of being right. Beyond the basketball, and I genuinely mean this. What Clark's approach demonstrates is something that applies to anyone who has ever been in a system that seemed to have an interest in keeping them smaller than they actually are. Arguing with that system almost never changes it. Filing complaints rarely moves the needle. but performing at a level that makes the system's decisions impossible to defend in front of the entire world, that's what forces change. That's what puts coaches at podiums admitting on live television that the previous approach had been wrong. Clark didn't silence the argument by fighting. She let the numbers make a case that no press conference statement could walk back. So if you've ever been in a room where someone was controlling how much space you were allowed to take up, remember what happened the moment Tibbetts handed Clark the keys. The result was a 55-point win, and a coach publicly admitting on camera in front of every reporter in the building that what came before it had not been right. Do the work in silence. Let the data speak. And eventually, the truth genuinely runs out of places to hide. Before we wrap up, if you've ever watched Caitlin Clark throw a pass that made you stop whatever you were doing, rewind the clip and watch it again just to figure out how she saw it drop a basketball emoji in the comments right now. Let's see how many people are actually in this conversation. And here's the question I really want your take on. Should Nate Tibbetts be named the permanent head coach of Team USA going forward? Or do you think Kara Lawson comes back and reinstalls the system that was in place before? Drop your honest take below. Every single perspective is welcome here. We read them, we don't delete them, and honestly, some of the sharpest analysis in this space doesn't come from the video itself. It comes from the comments section. Every comment you leave also helps this story reach more fans who deserve to hear the full picture, not just whatever version made the headlines that morning. Now you know exactly what happened in Puerto Rico, why it exposed something much bigger than one qualifying tournament, and what it means for the future of women's basketball going forward. But here's what I haven't told you yet. There is another player in this league whose journey makes this entire coaching controversy look like just the opening chapter of a much longer story. I already made that video. It picks up exactly where this one ends. It's right there on your screen. Don't miss it.